Thank you. Okay, members, so we are at item number 5 on the agenda, the draft minutes. So can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at page 234 to 244 of the meeting pack? Is everyone content that the draft minutes of the meeting on the 16th of January are a true reflection of the proceedings? Content? Yep. Item number 6, matters arising. There are none. Okay, proposed committee visit to Brussels. So can I ask Chris, Senior Assistant Clerk, just to speak on this, please, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So members might recall that off the back of the most recent committee visit to Brussels in November, the committee had agreed to explore the option of a further visit following the publication of the EU Commission Work Programme, which we currently expect to take place on the 11th of February. Now, the Secretariat had provisionally been scoping out whether the last week in March might be a workable slot for that visit, given that plans at that time had been underway to consider a visit to Westminster in February. Now, I know, Chair, you're going to consider that in Chairperson's business. And then earlier in March, members generally have their own engagements. However, there are plans underway for a summit meeting between the UK government and the EU in the coming months. While there hasn't been any formal confirmation around the dates for that summit yet, the current reported expectation is that it will take place during the first half of this year. And based on some conversations with the Office of the NI Executive in Brussels, our current best guess is that that will be somewhere between the last week in March and the end of April. So with that in mind, there's a chance that if we were to carry out a visit during that last week of March, stakeholders might have reduced availability generally, but they might also be slightly reluctant to engage externally in light of any sensitivities in the sort of lead up to that summit. Beyond that, though, the summit itself and any sort of outworkings or conversations following it might give a better sense of the direction of travel on EU and UK approaches to some of the elements of that work programme. Which might, if we did the visit before, that might actually negate some of the conversations that we would have. So with that in mind, it might prove more prudent to provisionally schedule our visit for May, pending confirmation of the timings of the summit. The Office of the NI Executive in Brussels has indicated that either the week before or the week of the May plenary of the European Parliament, so either the week commencing the 12th or the 19th of May, would probably be our best bets in terms of securing useful meetings. But in the first instance, Chair, I would just welcome views from yourself and members on whether they would be content to provisionally schedule the visit for May instead of March.
Okay, Chris, thank you. I think that makes sense. David?
I'm happy as well, but just the plenary, we haven't worked in Brussels. The plenary would definitely be best in terms of getting meetings and so on, but will come with probably significant added cost in terms of the price of hotels and so on rocket during that time. So just something to give consideration to, whether the value versus the likelihood of having more meetings and better meetings probably during that time is worthwhile, but the cost implications will go up, but that you will find it easier to get people.
That's helpful, yeah, and like there's, we think the week before the plenary there's probably some extra availability there with committee sitting, so we can do a comparison when we know availability of members. In that case, I will write out to members over email and check availability for those two time slots in May, and we can select a provisional slot based on that. And then following that, I'll revert to members in the coming weeks to take views on a proposed itinerary for the visit.
Okay, everybody happy with that? Mm-hmm. Good job, Chris, thank you. So moving then to item number 8, correspondence. 8.1, page 248 is a response from the First Deputy First Minister regarding the attendance of departmental officials at meetings of our committee, regardless of whether a policy area is reserved. So they have instructed Executive Office officials to raise the matter further within departments, in making officials available to give oral evidence when requested by the committee, specifically on reserved matters. Are members content to note? Mm-hmm. 8.2, page 256 is a copy of correspondence from the British Secretary of State to the Speaker regarding the written notification for the storm and break to be applied to Regulation EU 2024-2865 on classification, labelling and packaging of substances and mixtures. The letter states that the British government is to launch a consultation on what future steps may be necessary to avoid new barriers arising as a result of the EU Act, including whether to apply a consistent regime in Britain, and will be informed once it opens. Are members content to note this stage?
Yes.
Okay, so Chair's business. Sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I treated it as correspondence, but the recent email that we've just received from the department, I think it's the Department of Agriculture and Environment Rural Affairs, in relation to the plant health. Look, I think it's quite ridiculous. And I would look back here, to be fair to our Secretariat and staff, the email was supplied to them immediately after the committee at 23 minutes past 5, and to receive the response email at 9:45 before the committee today is ridiculous. I actually praised the officials at last week's meeting because I actually felt that the way in which they approached it was very helpful to us as a committee. But to come back with answers to some of these queries at that time, there is no one will convince me that they were only able to compile that email 15 minutes before this committee. I mean, I think it's disgraceful, and it's something that we should highlight. One of the answers is we retained the following from DEFRA. The other question that was asked, they say they don't hold this information. I would like to know that they asked DEFRA for that particular piece of information. And in another part, and it goes to Declan's point that he mentioned at the previous committee, we all felt it was helpful the way in which the questions were answered by the officials that we had submitted. But then to receive that, unfortunately we cannot share official speaking notes at the end of the meeting, or at the end of the email, sort of suggests to me, well, what on earth is the point in you coming and speaking before the committee if you can't share what the official speaking note would be? So maybe that's a formatting issue that we talked about, but I would like to see this addressed, because I don't think it's acceptable, number one, for them to be putting this on the agenda 15 minutes before the meeting today. Number two, the way in which they are failing to provide the actual notes in which they spoke to. That can be addressed to a formatting issue, and also the fact being that some of the information, they say they don't hold this information, but we see no evidence whether or not they asked the question to DEFRA or others. I just think it's important for the committee's work that we get timely answers to these questions. It helps inform me as to where I see things going forward with inquiries and whatnot.
David?
Yes, Chair, and just to follow on from that, I do think it's becoming almost a trend as well that the committee's receiving information from various sources right up in the run-up committee. When we discussed substitute members, there was discussion around the legal implications of that, because people should have given due consideration to the notes and so, or the papers and so on before they got here. Furnishing members with information on the morning of the committee, certainly 15 minutes beforehand, or even as we've had in the past during the meeting, so that we have to pause the meeting to give members time to read it, is not giving them the time to duly consider these matters, very technical matters usually, at all. And we should be clear that that's how we see it. Delivering it to us that late, whilst perhaps preferable to not having it at all, is not giving members due time to consider and look through the ramifications of some of these things. So I think we just need to put that on the record too, not just for DERA but across the board, that actually that's not acceptable.
Okay. Bert, do you want to comment on that?
I can come in on the about the speaking notes. Hopefully that won't be an issue in the future. After last week's meeting and the committee's decision to delegate responsibility for drafting questions to officials, we have asked that a written response to those questions will be submitted to the committee at the latest 9:30 on the morning of the meeting. They will be answered during the oral evidence session, but you will at least have the information in front of you to be able to ask supplementary questions if you like. So hopefully that will address that issue.
And through the chair, and in doing that, obviously it seems like it's late 9:30 of that morning, but the very fact would be that we would then have subsequent time after that to consider the responses, because normally after that first evidence session we then have a further reporting stage. So I think that would probably solve that issue. Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
So are people content with Jonathan's initial proposal then, that we write back to DERA, just say, look, we appreciate the response, but we want it earlier?
Yeah.
Chair, just if you, I'm more than happy with what my colleagues have said. When I actually looked at the DERA reply to this committee, it actually looked like a reply to Freedom of Information request. You know, we get these lines. It's as terse as it can be, and the response to question one is, "We do not hold this information." You know, this isn't that. You know, we're not FYing DERA. You know, this is a scrutiny committee. You know, so I would like, and it's not particularly a shot at DERA, but I think we'd like more fulsome answers as well. But happy with what's been proposed.
Declan?
I think all of those points are validly put, although I'm heartened by what Marie has outlined in relation to getting us onto the front foot. And without giving yourself or your staff any additional work, we are now approaching 1 year into the life of this committee. And I said quite some time ago, we've to allow for teething problems, departments adjusting to the requirements of the committee, and the committee getting into a more cohesive way of doing its business, so that we're maximising the amount of collegiate and collaborative activity between ourselves and those who are coming in to offer evidence. So, without wanting to give you or staff additional work, Marie, and without escalating this to formal correspondence, I do think that there would be value in the course of the next period of weeks if you or other senior colleagues could reach out to your alternates within the relevant departments informally, well, formally, but on the basis of a conversation, to try and ensure that we now do have a mutual understanding of how we would like to interact with departments and what our expectations would be, proportionate then to all of the other responsibilities and priorities that respective departmental staff have to undertake, with a view to trying to standardise to the greatest extent possible the presentation of information, the timeliness of information, with a view to allowing us maximise our responsibilities, but also being helpful to colleagues and departments at the same time.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, just through the chair, there's actually myself and another member of staff are meeting with TEO officials next week to discuss those very issues, sort of in the context that we are now a year on. And I had also mentioned, I think, Declan, you were actually absent for this meeting, I think it was last week, that the same is happening with Cabinet Office at official level, just a sort of an informal review. And then obviously I will be reporting back to the committee on the outcome of both of those meetings and any work that comes out of that.
It's very timely, you're ahead of the curve, but I think that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Everybody content? Okay, so Chair's business then, item number 9. So as Chris has alluded to, we also had a planned proposed trip to Westminster to engage over there with regard to the work that we do in February. Now, there have been a number of people who have come back lately and said they are unable to attend. My perspective, given the small numbers, I don't think the trip should go ahead in those circumstances, and we should seek to rearrange that trip also, if people are content.
Content.
Okay, thank you. So next item is any other business? None. Just to remind everybody, meeting's now going to move into closed session again, and we're going to await a new set of table papers that will include the 2 final reports of agreement. So we're going to move into closed session, and we'll take a bit of a recess until we receive those papers.
Committee Room 30. Sound.